Hey, what's up guys, OSJ here with another kick-ass video, and this time it's a subject that has been thrust upon me by a recent event. So, I'm not going to name any names here because quite frankly I don't want to give this guy any publicity, but another YouTuber in a recent podcast made a ludicrous statement that there are no good games on the C64. Bit weird that he stated that because he has never owned a C64 and actually only owns a C64 Mini, which to be honest didn't have the best games on there. But it gets worse, he hasn't even taken the Mini out of its box. He then went on to say that every game on the C64 was worse than the NES versions, and then gave Batman as an example. Yeah, well, Batman on the C64 isn't even a top 30 game for me, but it certainly isn't crap either, and to compare it against the NES is like comparing chalk and cheese, as they are so different. In fact, so different, if I did a comparison I probably wouldn't include the NES version, because although it's good, it certainly doesn't follow the plot of the movie. Anyway, that really pissed me off, as you can probably tell, as for someone to say that there are no good games in the catalogue as big as the C64 without actually playing any games is just a total bullshit thing to say. So, in response to this, I've gone and found 10 games where the C64 totally kicked the Nintendo's ass. Actually, I was surprised that really there weren't very many comparable games on the two systems, mostly because the NES games have been so NES-fied that they no longer resemble the original game. Before this video starts though, I want to point out that I'm not bashing any systems here. I owned both of these systems back in the day and they are both brilliant. Anyway, enough waffling on, let's take a look at 10 games where the C64 kicked Nintendo's ass. First up we have UVidium. I've made no secret that UVidium and I don't get along, but that doesn't change the fact that it's an absolute stonker on the C64. So much so, no version comes close to it. It is my mate Lucas's favourite C64 game, and it oozes class right from the start with super smooth scrolling, great graphics and gameplay to die for. And dying is what I do a lot in this game. The NES version however was shelved after being developed and later picked up by Mindscape and rebranded under the movie license The Last Starfighter, which being that the movie was released some 6 years earlier is a weird decision. Anyway, as you can see, movie license apart, it's just a version of the C64 classic, but it doesn't come close to it in any aspect. It's far too busy and hectic. The sound is horrible and I don't get why they even tried to mix music in and sound, as the music only plays when you stop shooting, and anyone who knows UVidium knows you never stop shooting. Next up we have Ghostbusters. Anyone who was around at the time will know how big Ghostbusters was, and it was only natural that a game would come off the back of it. All the versions were pretty similar and they were all based on the original C64 game. The game itself followed the plot of the movie well, and I'm sure that most people will have played this at some point on some system. The NES version is, apart from the Atari 2600, the worst one by a clear mile. It looks so bland, no detail on anything, and the Ghostbusters sprites have had no thought put into them at all. For God's sake, they are even wearing green. It has however been remastered on the NES in recent years, and if that was the original NES version then we probably wouldn't have been seeing this in this video now. Raid on Bungling Bay is the next game, and again it's a classic on the C64. The super smooth multi-directional scrolling with inertia is perfect, the simplicity of the graphics is brilliant, and it's a game that is still held in high regards on the C64 today. It's also a game that gameplay wise has never aged. You could stick this in front of any kid today and they would happily play it. As we can see, the NES version went for more detail, but actually I still don't think it looks as good. And then there's the scrolling. I mean, it's choppy on a grand scale, which after 2 minutes starts to hurt your eyes, and the music is like a drill being slowly bored into your skull, and after about 10 seconds you get to a point where you have to switch it off. So aside from the flashier graphics that for me still aren't great, this version fails in every other department. Last Ninja 2 is next up, and this is the one I actually mentioned in the slanderers comments section. There are a few games that actually define a system, but I would say that Last Ninja 2 on the C64 was definitely one of Commodore's finest moments, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. Anyway, in my research on this game I ended up at the Angry Video Game Nerd's channel and watched him play the NES version, which was released under the name of Last Ninja, which is very confusing since the game is part of a series, and I pissed myself laughing at his take on it, cause yeah, the C64 version's controls can be annoying, but the NES version with the D-pad takes awkward to a whole new level. There are loads of things wrong with the NES version, starting with the music and ending with the hit detection being so bad that the game is virtually unplayable unless you were a sadomasochist. Next up is the arcade classic Yeah Kung Fu. This was one of the best known fighters before the likes of Street Fighter etc. came out, and in the arcade version it was a super fast fun game with an unbelievable amount of moves. The C64 version pulls this game off perfectly with the one button joystick capturing most if not all of the moves from the arcade. Looks great and sounds great. The NES version though, as you can see, has no backgrounds, horrible looking sprites, crappy music, and really none of the charm that we got from the arcade. But the big kick in the teeth is that the lack of moves on the NES version, and even the ones you can pull off are hard to do with the D-pad. I'm not the biggest fan of the arcade to be honest, but I can at least appreciate how close the C64 version comes to it, but in my eyes the NES version is crap. Next up we have a game that we have seen on a few of these kick-ass videos, and that's Defender of the Crown. Previously we saw that the C64 version actually outdid the Amiga version as far as features and overall gameplay went, and now we are seeing that the C64 version outdoes the NES in every department. The game on the NES just looks so dull and flat, the sound is horrible unlike the quality of the SID, and although gameplay wise isn't bad, just doesn't feel like a cinemaware game. For me, some games were never meant to be on the NES, and Defender of the Crown definitely falls into that category. Winter Games is next up. So Epic's knocked out some real cracking sports games, and Winter Games on the C64 is the best of them all. It's one of them games that I will always remember playing with my friends, and the quality of the whole package on the C64 lands this game firmly in the top 10 best games on the C64 for me. The NES version however is diabolical. Crappy graphics, ear-piercingly bad sound, and the gameplay is pants too, especially on the D-pad. Don't believe it can be that bad? Go play it, as it's one that has to be played to believe just how bad it is. And really, the NES should have knocked this kind of game out of the park. Next up is Robocop. So again, it's a movie game, and again the C64 version feels like the movie, apart from the ludicrous decision to let Robocop jump. Anyway, jumping apart, this game was the first big box game I ever bought, and I loved it even though it was broken. I actually had the NES version as well when I was younger, and it just never felt right. Robocop moves so jerky and looks more like a skeleton than part man part machine. Also, is it just me, or is the main sprite far too tall? I mean, it looks like he's picking on a bunch of kids in chihuahuas, and that music on a loop is an absolute nightmare. Balderdash is the next game. The thing is, with this one, both games are really good, but for me the NES version has done what a lot of NES games did and totally changed the feel of the game, and thus making the game not Balderdash in my opinion. As a puzzle game in its own right, the NES version is good, but as a version of Balderdash it comes nowhere near the C64 for the feel of Balderdash. Whether that's down to a different character or the jolly music, I'm not sure. I just know that something is off, and it's not as entertaining as the original C64 version. Last on the list is one of my favourite C64 games of all time, and that's Myth, History in the Making. For me, this is a definitive version and outdoes all the other versions such as Amiga, Spectrum and Amstrad. However, the NES version was another game that Nintendo decided to reskin and cash in on a movie title, Conan. Starting to be a pattern here, right? But like with The Last Starfighter, this version had really nothing to do with the movie apart from its name and the main sprite. Anyway, it's just awful, and also misses the shoot 'em up level that we got on the C64. And also, the main bit for me is, what good is Myth without Jerome Tell music? Okay, that's it for this video. This was just 10 out of many that I could have named, but as I stated, that doesn't mean that the NES is crap, as there were loads of absolute crackers on the system. But I'm not just so blinkered to say that this system has no good games on it like some. Let me know in the comments below what games you preferred on the C64. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more great retro content. Oh, and if you want to support the channel on Patreon like these quality folks going up the screen right now, get on over to my Patreon channel where you can pledge for as little as $1. That will get your name in the end credits, video requests, giveaways and more in the future. Till next time, this is OSG signing out.